For almost 10,000 years, growing food ran on muscle, human muscle and the muscle of animals. Then, in a single human lifetime, one machine ended that forever and quietly built the modern world in its place. To understand how big this change was, you have to picture the world before it. For nearly all of human history, farming was limited by one thing: the power of muscle. A farmer and a team of horses could only plow so much ground in a day, only plant and harvest so many acres in a season. And because each farm could feed only a handful of people, almost everyone had to farm. There was no other choice. In the year 1900, 41% of Americans were farmers and 60% of the country lived in the countryside. Across the world, the numbers were even higher. Humanity was, overwhelmingly, a species of farmers bent over the soil, chained to the seasons, and never more than one bad harvest away from hunger. And the animals that powered all this came with a hidden and enormous cost. In the 1920s, Americans kept more than 25 million horses and mules, most of them working animals on farms. Every one of them had to be fed every single day, whether it worked or not. And they didn't eat air. They ate oats and hay grown on the very same farms they worked. Consider this staggering fact. In 1915, an estimated 93 million acres of American cropland, about 27% of everything harvested, was devoted not to feeding people, but to feeding horses and mules. On a typical farm, roughly a quarter of the land existed purely to fuel the animals that pulled the plow. The engine ate a quarter of the field. Muscle power was, in a very literal sense, eating the harvest. It's worth pausing on just how demanding those animals really were. A working horse was not a machine you could simply switch off. It needed feeding and watering every single day of its life, needed rest after only a few hours of heavy work, and needed a full day to recover afterward. It could be spooked, it could fall ill, it could go lame at the worst possible moment in the harvest. Each animal took years to raise and train before it could even pull a plow, and it worked for perhaps a decade before it aged out. A large farm needed not one horse but a whole team, and often a spare team to rotate, because tired horses simply stopped. They filled the barns, demanded constant care, and left behind mountains of manure to be hauled away. For thousands of years, this was simply the unquestioned cost of putting food on the table. The tractor, for all its noise and fumes, asked for none of it. It waited silently in the shed until the exact moment it was needed. The first attempts to break this limit were enormous steam-powered machines that appeared in the late 1800s. They were genuinely powerful, but they were also gigantic, wildly expensive, and so heavy they could crack the soil and bog down in soft ground. Only the largest operations could afford them. Then, in the 1890s and early 1900s, inventors began strapping the new internal combustion engine, the same basic idea as a car engine, onto farm frames. These early gasoline tractors pointed the way forward, but most were still clumsy, unreliable, and far too costly for the average family farmer. The tractor existed, but it had not yet arrived. For most farmers, the horse still ruled the field. The machine that finally changed everything came, fittingly, from the man who had already transformed the automobile. In 1918, Henry Ford began mass-producing a small, light, affordable tractor called the Fordson. Built on the same assembly line principles as his Model T, suddenly, a tractor wasn't a giant luxury for wealthy landowners. It was a machine an ordinary farmer could actually buy. The effect was explosive. By 1923, 3 out of every 4 tractors sold in America were Fordsons. Ford had done for the tractor exactly what he'd done for the car. He'd made it cheap enough for the masses, and in doing so, he lit the fuse on a revolution that would empty the countryside and remake the world. Over the next 2 decades, the tractor grew up. In 1931, Caterpillar introduced a practical diesel engine, which burned cheaper fuel and produced far more pulling power. Rubber tires replaced steel wheels, letting tractors move faster and drive on roads without tearing them up. And perhaps most important of all, an Irish inventor named Harry Ferguson perfected the 3-point hitch, an elegant system that let a single tractor attach to, lift, and precisely control almost any implement. A plow, a planter, a mower, a loader. With that, the tractor stopped being just a replacement horse. It became a universal power source, the beating heart of the farm, able to do dozens of different jobs that once needed teams of animals and crews of people. For a long time, the horse and the tractor fought a slow, stubborn battle across the fields of America. Many farmers were deeply skeptical, insisting a living animal could never truly be replaced by a machine that guzzled fuel and broke down. But the economics were relentless. A tractor didn't need feeding when it sat idle. It didn't get tired, it didn't get sick, and it never needed a quarter of the farm planted just to keep it alive. By the mid-1950s, the number of tractors on American farms finally passed the number of horses and mules. Within just 2 decades, the working horse population collapsed from over 25 million to around 2.5 million. A partnership between human and animal that had lasted for thousands of years came, very quickly, to an end. And here is one of the most beautiful and overlooked consequences of that shift. Remember those 93 million acres that had been growing feed for horses? As the animals disappeared, that enormous area of farmland was suddenly freed. By 1960, the cropland devoted to feeding draft animals had fallen from 93 million acres to just 4 million. An area of farmland larger than many entire countries stopped growing fuel for muscles and started growing food for people. The tractor didn't just replace the horse. It handed back a quarter of the nation's farmland to humanity, all at once, without plowing a single new acre of wilderness. But the deepest change the tractor caused wasn't in the soil. It was in where people lived and what they did with their lives. When one person on a machine could do the work that once took a whole family and a team of horses, farms no longer needed many hands. So the hands left. They walked off the land and into the towns and cities looking for other work. The numbers are staggering. In 1900, 41% of Americans were farmers. By 1960, that had collapsed to just 8%. Today, fewer than 2% of Americans farm for a living. The countryside that had once held most of the population emptied out, and the great cities of the modern world filled up with the people the tractor had set free. And those people were free to do something entirely new, anything other than grow food. This is the quiet miracle at the center of the whole story. Before the gasoline tractor, a single American farm grew enough to feed itself and maybe 2 other people. Today, thanks to tractors and the fertilizers, seeds, and machines that came with them, a single farm can feed as many as 130 people. The average farm swelled from around 100 acres in 1900 to 300 by 1960, and far more today. A tiny sliver of society now grows the food for everyone else. And it does it with such overwhelming surplus that in wealthy countries, hunger became the rare exception rather than the daily rule. And this was never only an American story. As the 20th century went on, the tractor rolled out across the entire planet. In the Soviet Union, leaders made the tractor a symbol of the future itself, plastering it across posters as the machine that would drag a peasant nation into the modern age. Across war-torn Europe, mechanization helped rebuild shattered farms with a fraction of the old labor. And then in the 1960s and 70s came the Green Revolution, when tractors, combined with new high-yield seeds, chemical fertilizers, and irrigation, arrived in countries like India, Mexico, and across much of Asia. Nations that had lived for centuries in the constant shadow of famine suddenly began growing grain in staggering surplus. Hundreds of millions of people who might otherwise have starved were fed instead. It is genuinely difficult to name another single machine that has saved more human lives, so quietly, so indirectly, and with so little credit. Wherever the tractor went, the ancient chain binding human survival to backbreaking labor was finally broken. But no revolution this large ever comes without a price, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. As the machines grew bigger and the farms grew fewer, countless small rural towns that had depended entirely on farm families slowly withered away. Skills and ways of life that had been passed down for countless generations vanished within just a few decades. The tractor also bound farming tightly to fossil fuels and to expensive debt-financed machinery, locking farmers onto a treadmill of ever-rising costs. And the vast, uniform fields that tractors made possible brought real environmental costs of their own, from soil erosion to the loss of the mixed, animal-powered farms that had once covered the land. The tractor freed humanity from the field, but it also swept away an entire world in the process. A world of horses and hand tools, of full barns and crowded harvest crews, of small farms and the tight-knit communities that lived among them. Progress, as it so often does, arrived carrying both a gift and a loss in the very same hands. Step back, and you can see just how much rests on this one invention. Every scientist, teacher, doctor, engineer, artist, and programmer in the modern world exists because they don't have to grow their own food. Every city, every university, every office tower is built on the surplus that mechanized farming creates. The world's population has soared from around 1.6 billion people in 1900 to over 8 billion today. And yet the share of humanity trapped in subsistence farming has fallen dramatically. We fed billions more people using far fewer farmers, and the tractor is the machine that made that arithmetic possible. It is the silent foundation beneath almost everything we think of as modern life. What makes it all so strange is how invisible this revolution is to most of us. We celebrate the smartphone, the airplane, the computer. We rarely spare a thought for the diesel machine crawling across a field somewhere far from the city. And yet without it, none of the rest would be possible. There would be no time for invention if most of us were still bent over the soil from dawn to dusk. The tractor bought humanity the one resource it had never had in surplus before: time. Time to think, to build, to dream, to become something other than a farmer. It quietly rewrote the possibilities of a human life. And the revolution the tractor began is still not finished. The machine that once replaced the muscles of horses is now, in a sense, beginning to replace the hands and the eyes of the farmer too. The newest tractors steer themselves by satellite, guided to within an inch across a field they navigate entirely on their own. Some can already run straight through the night with no driver in the seat at all, planting and harvesting while the farmer sleeps in the farmhouse. Sensors and software now decide, plant by plant, exactly where to place a seed or a single drop of fertilizer. In just a single century, the tractor took us from a world powered by the muscle of animals to fields worked by machines that can very nearly think for themselves. The quiet giant is still growing, and the transformation it set in motion is still reshaping the land beneath our feet. So the next time you drive past a field and see a tractor working the land, try to see it for what it truly is. Not just a piece of farm equipment, but one of the most transformative machines ever built. It ended a partnership with animals that lasted 10,000 years. It gave back a quarter of a nation's farmland in a generation. It emptied the countryside, filled the cities, and freed billions of human beings to do something other than survive. It is the great, quiet giant of the modern age, and almost nobody ever thinks about it. If this changed how you see the machines that feed us, follow along. There is a whole hidden world of engineering behind everything on your plate.